What's up, addicts? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. In this video, we are breaking down the NFC East, going over the trade value changes for all of the fantasy relevant players on these teams in the NFC East. But before we get started, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button for more content like this, and let's get right into the video. Alright guys, beginning with none other than the Dallas Cowboys, one of the more notable teams in terms of making splashes and news updates throughout this tumultuous offseason. Now, recently they add Andy Dalton. Don't read into any of the quote-unquote controversy. This is truly a backup for Dak Prescott, but it's a really good move for the team. Backup quarterbacks can really help the second team defense by keeping them sharp. And I think Andy Dalton is definitely a capable backup that can at least try to keep their season afloat if for some reason Dak were to go down midway through the season. They also grab Anthony Brown, cornerback there. They get Clinton Dix from Chicago, and they get Gerald McCoy on the defensive line. They did lose Randall Cobb and Jason Witten. Travis Frederick retires. That's going to be a big hit. Robert Quinn on the defensive line. Malik Collins as well, and then Byron Jones, one of the better cornerbacks, goes to Miami. So their defense definitely took some hits. They did fuel up a little bit in the draft in taking Trevon Diggs and Neville Gallimore and Reggie Robinson. So they're doing their best to refuel that defensive backfield and their defensive line. But overall, it's hard to see this defense taking a step forward. But for fantasy, I would argue that that's actually a really good thing. They add CeeDee Lamb, obviously, in the first round. Falls to them all the way to pick 17. Unbelievable that he fell that far. They couldn't resist taking a guy that I believe they said it was number 4 on their big board before the draft even started. So this is an all-offensive team moving forward. The only experience that we have with Mike McCarthy being a head coach was in Green Bay, in which they very rarely actually had a dominant defense. They had a very much pass-first offense. And granted, they had Aaron Rodgers, but I'd argue that Dak Prescott, in this point of his career, is going to be able to put up similar numbers to what we've seen from some of Aaron Rodgers' better seasons, especially if the defense is basically making it happen. I could easily see this being a Dallas team that has to score 30-plus points to be able to keep up, and for fantasy, that is drool-inducing. So Dak Prescott sees his dynasty value go up tremendously with the addition of CeeDee Lamb. Yes, he's on the franchise tag, but if I had to bet any money on it, he'll have a deal sometime in July. The franchise tag just gives them a little bit more time to work that out. It doesn't really make any sense for them financially to prolong this decision any longer. They should get the deal done, and I expect them to do that by July. Ezekiel Elliott didn't really have any rise in his value. It's very stable. Yes, they did lose Travis Frederick, but they did add Tyler Biadasz from Wisconsin to help shore up that gap, and their offensive line has a decent amount of depth to it, so I don't see that as being a huge detriment to anyone there. Tony Pollard didn't get replaced in terms of backup running back, so his value goes up a little bit. Now, Amari Cooper is the interesting one. He gets a massive contract, a 5-year, $100 million deal, but they have an out after 2 years. They can basically let him go for no cap problems whatsoever. So he's basically on a 2-year deal, and then it's year to year from that point. But with the draft of CeeDee Lamb and the emergence of Michael Gallup last year, I don't really know that it's expected to see Amari Cooper here beyond that 2-year point. Michael Gallup could end up being the odd man out, but I'm not really a huge fan of Amari Cooper from a fantasy angle anyway. He has been very consistent in being inconsistent. Someone that if you look at his game logs for his entire career, he has weeks where he absolutely kills it and then weeks where he just completely disappears. So Amari Cooper is one of my favorite guys in a best ball league and one of my least favorite guys in any type of lineup setting league. So I have actually moved him down after the acquisition of CeeDee Lamb. Definitely moved Michael Gallup down as well, because CeeDee Lamb is going to become the primary target eventually. It's going to take a year or two, but eventually CeeDee Lamb should be the number one weapon of Dak Prescott CeeDee Lamb sees a massive value boost, in my opinion, going here, getting to play with a really good quarterback in Dak Prescott, going with a team that invested heavily in him. It's going to be a fun ride to watch these guys grow together. So really likes the CeeDee Lamb addition here. And then Blake Jarwin getting signed after they let Jason Witten go, or re-signed rather. So lights up for him. He looked pretty good in the short amount of work that he was able to get last year. So he's another one of those tight ends in that tier of guys around Ian Thomas and Jonnu Smith that you should probably look to acquire before they have a breakout season, because it could come for any one of these guys, multiple of them as early as this year. So love Blake Jarwin. Okay, let's get to the New York Giants. Now they give a massive deal to James Bradberry, shoring up that defensive backfield. They pick up Blake Martinez there from the Packers, and they get Dion Lewis as a backup to Saquon Barkley. Eli Manning retires, and they had Mike Remmers, their tackle, leave, who wasn't very good. They replaced him with Andrew Thomas with pick number 4 in the draft. Interesting pick here just based on the tackles, but in terms of evaluation, all 4 of the guys were ranked pretty similarly, so they felt Andrew Thomas was the best pick. He's the number 1 tackle drafted overall. They also grabbed Matt Pete later on. Pretty much an all defensive draft. They didn't draft any wide receivers, which is really good news for the existing guys in terms of fantasy value. Daniel Jones has been pretty unsung up to this point, but I think his value definitely goes up with the addition of these tackles. Should give him a little bit more room to breathe there. Saquon Barkley, his value goes up slightly with the improvement to the offensive line, but it was hard for his value to go up because he was already almost as high as Christian McCaffrey. Reminder that he came into the league a year later, so he does most likely have a little bit more longevity to his career. Still wouldn't trade him straight up for Christian McCaffrey, but I do really like Saquon as our number 2 guy on our board. Dion Lewis is someone, if you have Saquon and you want a backup plan in case he tweaks his ankle again, then I guess you could roster him, but otherwise probably someone you leave on your waiver wire. Now Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard both see their values go up here. Sterling Shepard is right about his prime. Darius Slayton is much younger, but they didn't draft any replacements to these guys, which means that they are going to get the entire 2020 season to continue to improve and develop rapport with Daniel Jones. I really like Darius Slayton a lot. He's someone that I feel like, at least based on what I'm able to see from Twitter and from Dynasty leagues that I'm in, and just other reports of other people making trades for him, his value is really low right now. You can get him pretty cheap in most leagues, and I would just put an offer out there. If you don't have him right now, if you're able to get him for pretty cheap, like a next year 2nd or 3rd round pick, I would definitely do that. Sterling Shepard, not as excited about. I do think they'll probably keep both of these guys long term. Golden Tate, I think, is going to end up being the odd man out after this year. He's a bit up there. He's already past 30. But Darius Slayton, for sure, was already Daniel Jones' primary target for most of last season when he was healthy. So I really look for Darius Slayton to take another step forward this year. And then Evan Ingram is really hard to value just with how injury prone he's been. But with the way that this offense is trending and the way that he was used when he was healthy, it's hard to not consider him a buy. If the person has him, is just fed up with the amount of times he's injured, you might be able to get him pretty cheap. Okay, let's jump to the Philadelphia Eagles. One of the more interesting off seasons. They grab Javon Hargrave, a nose tackle. They do lose Jason Peters and Vaitai. I think I said in another video that we came from another team, so sorry if I messed that up. Rodney McLeod, safety, and Darius Slay, cornerback. So definitely trying to fix their defensive backfield, what's needed a lot of help last year. Jordan Howard and Darren Sproles, Nelson Aguilar, all gone. Ronald Darby and Malcolm Jenkins gone. So basically do a swap of some of their offensive line and defensive guys and lose some offensive pieces. And then they get to the draft and they take Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. A little bit of a curious pick, but Jalen Reagor was a really good outside receiver there for TCU. They're definitely wanting more of a X-type receiver to most likely replace Alshon Jeffrey. I don't think he's going to be playing much longer past this season. So Jalen Reagor there definitely is going to be competing and should arguably be the number 1 receiver in terms of rookie receivers for redraft this season. Now, overall, we still have CeeDee Lamb ranked higher, but Jalen Reagor sees a massive boost to his value going here. Jalen Hurts going in the second round, also an interesting pickup here. Carson Wentz has been hurt quite a bit, but none of those injuries have really been characteristic of injuries that are connecting to one another. They've all kind of been fluky, and I wouldn't go so far as to label Carson Wentz as injury prone, but Jalen Hurts is definitely someone that you're going to want to roster because of the value that he brings in terms of his ability to run the ball. He was a massive fantasy player in college. If you play college fantasy, Jalen Hurts was very, very, very good. And anytime you get that Konami code type quarterback that can do both run and pass the ball very well, running the ball for a quarterback is a lot more efficient for fantasy points being scored. And if Carson Wentz does go down, Jalen Hurts becomes an instant quarterback 12 or quarterback 1 in the NFL for fantasy. So overall, looking at this, Carson Wentz sees his value go down slightly with the addition of Jalen Hurts, but not really enough to move him down the rankings at all. Jalen Hurts could have gone to a better situation where he was projected to get immediate work, but I do think this is still a really good landing spot for him. Miles Sanders doesn't get any replacements drafted in a very good running back class, so his value goes up pretty precipitously. And then Corey Clement will most likely be replaced by a guy like Carlos Hyde. There's rumors right now that the Eagles will be drafting signing Carlos Hyde or someone like him to give a veteran presence there, which kind of they had last year with Jordan Howard. But I do think Miles Sanders is going to get the majority of the work, even if they have a Carlos Hyde type back there. So I don't think that hurts Miles Sanders' value too much. Just saying the handcuff to Sanders is probably not who you think it is yet. Jalen Reagor definitely sees his value go up. Alshon Jeffrey, like I said, probably in the last year of the league, and not really someone that I see has a lot of upside. So if you can get anything for him in a trade, I'd be looking to trade off of him. Same thing with Deshaun Jackson. I do think he'll have a couple of good games, but his injury history is definitely more prevalent in terms of I don't think he is going to be able to sustain a full workload for a full season. So even if you keep him, if he has a good couple weeks, I would try to trade him before the season is over. And then Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert is the more interesting tight end tandem here. Zach Ertz has been a top tier tight end for a few years now and is most likely still going to have another good season, but I think his value is going to continue to dip a little bit as they use Dallas Goedert more. So I would sell high on Zach Ertz if you can and try to buy Dallas Goedert before that changing of the guard completely happens, because then you'll be underwater on Ertz, and if you don't have Goedert, you're basically going to be kicking yourself, because this is probably the last time you actually have to swap those guys and switch from the guy that would probably be better this season to flip it around, because there's a chance that Dallas Goedert supplants Ertz as soon as this year. All right, and then let's get to Washington. I'm just going to say right now, just looking at the moves that this team made, I won't be surprised if this team is the team that's drafting Trevor Lawrence next year at the 101. They add Kendall Fuller, and then they trade a draft pick to get Kyle Allen for some reason. I mean, maybe Kyle Allen is better than Dwayne Haskins. So they lose Case Keenum and Colt McCoy. Chris Thompson out, Vernon Davis out, Jordan Reed out. They trade Trent Williams to the 49ers. Eric Flowers is gone, Quentin Dunbar gone, Josh Norman gone, Rogers Cromartie gone, Kayvon Webster gone. So a lot of their starters on defense are out. They do draft Chase Young, the defensive end out of Ohio State. That's a really good pick for them. I think he'll be a franchise player for them for a long time. And then they grab Antonio Gibson with their next pick, even though they already have a pretty full running back room. So that's curious. And they're pretty insistent on labeling him as a running back. Maybe that's for financial reasoning, but it's hard to see them putting him as a receiver. They grab a tackle a little bit later, and then also draft Antonio Gandy-Golden. So they didn't really do much outside of Chase Young to fix the amount of holes that their defense now leaves. So this could be a really, really bad defense. Also good news for the Cowboys and Eagles and the Giants offense. So Dwayne Haskins, I don't really think his value changed at all. It was already low. It's still low. Darius Geis sees his value dip a little bit with the addition of Antonio Gibson. That kind of signals to me that they don't trust that Darius Geis is ever going to be the workhorse that they drafted him to be. Antonio Gibson's value is a complete enigma right now. You got people in Washington comparing him to Christian McCaffrey, which is kind of asinine when you ask me, but he could be a very explosive player in this league. There's just very, very little production to go off of. I think he had something like less than 80 carries in college. Try to pull up his numbers here. But then Bryce Love, obviously, is probably the odd man out here with Darius Geist there. Sorry, I wanted to pull that back up. So, yeah, Antonio Gibson only had 33 rushing attempts in college. He had 369 yards and 12 touchdowns on 33 attempts, rushing attempts and 38 catches. So really, really, really efficient with the touches that he did have. He just barely had any. Ran a 4.39 40 and 122.8 speed score. Both of those are 98th, 99th percentile. Compares well to Joe Mixon, but again, no prospect in terms of his actual production. So does test really well at the combine. Looked good on the few amount of touches that he had, but he played in Memphis. Why wasn't he used more in Memphis? Really hard to read how this is going to fit, especially for a team like the Redskins that don't look to be a prolific offense. Adrian Peterson is probably a running back 5. I don't really know how many more years he has, but he's probably still going to remain at least a usable asset if you need a running back in a pinch. Terry McLaurin, I don't think you really saw his value change at all. He was already on the upward trajectory, someone that you still might be able to acquire cheap if you can sell them on how bad the Redskins are going to be. I still think Terry McLaurin will be a good fantasy asset, even if the Redskins are a dumpster fire. Steven Sims, I don't really think his value went down with the addition of Gandy Golden. I think that was more Kelvin Harmon that went down with the addition of Gandy Golden. Steve Sims was actually finished the year on a really high note last year. The last couple weeks of the season, he was finishing as like wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 most weeks. So we'll see if that trajectory continues with Dwayne Haskins into the second season. But there's really, in terms of tight ends on this roster, there's really no one that is worth rostering. I think Jeremy Sprinkle is their tight end 1 right now, which is gross. So we're just going to ignore the tight ends on Washington and stash these guys and wait for a quarterback replacement in 2021, hopefully of the likes of a guy like Trevor Lawrence, because that would be really good for guys like Terry McLaurin and Steven Sims. So if you can acquire some of the Washington receivers now while their value is a little bit lower, you'll probably be thanking yourself in about a year. All right, let's get into the next videos, guys. We're almost done with this series, so thank you for joining me. If you're looking for Dynasty rankings, check out our website or click the link in the description box below. We have full list there with trade values as well. And we're going to continue posting videos like this one, so if you liked it, please hit that like and subscribe button. We'll see you in the next video.